Hello and good day to you. This is Tracy Harrison from the School of Applied Functional Medicine, and I want to invite all of you progressive healthcare practitioners to come over and hang out with me for a bit for this month's featured clinical topic. Today we're going to be talking about the parasympathetic nervous system and the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve, I think, sometimes receives such short shrift in our discussions about exciting and sexy anatomy and physiology in the body. Things like the gallbladder and bile, or the lowly lymph system, or the vagus nerve. They tend to get marginalized. Sure, we've all taken basic training. A&P, we know it's there. We know it has important jobs, but we don't typically highlight it as having some of the most essential roles, hint, hint, in preventing and also helping our work as practitioners in partnership with our patients and clients to reverse disease dynamics and actually recover and enjoy a restored, resilient vitality in their bodies. I want to dive right in because, as usual, I have a lot of juicy facts to talk about today. And I want to start off by just bringing us all back to the notion of actually addressing the true root causes of disease. Now, at the School of Applied Functional Medicine, we talk often about the difference between a diagnosis, right? When something has become severe enough that we give it a label, we give it a well-agreed label for a collection of symptoms that's bad, that's causing some kind of dysfunction, anywhere from mild to moderate to truly life-threatening or permanently debilitating. But looking upstream from the diagnosis, right? What occurred before the diagnosis? What were the precipitating mechanisms? We can often find a number of different, what we call disease dynamics. These are things like estrogen dominance and insulin resistance and hypothyroid function. And an understimulated stress axis, right? A hypocortisol dynamic, or fatty liver, or enhanced intestinal permeability, right? Any of these types of disease dynamics that we know, if allowed to continue, can begin to precipitate other related and synergistic dysfunction in the body and eventually become bad enough to be diagnosed. But if we're looking even further upstream for that, right? The diagnoses, the mechanisms, the disease dynamics, and we go further upstream. How did we get there? How did we get to these types of dysfunctional dynamics in the body? We, of course, come to lifestyle choices. You undoubtedly are well aware through your study, your position here as far as being a progressive healthcare practitioner, that lifestyle choices are where it's at. Absolutely, we can have a predisposition for a lot of different chronic disease dynamics because of genetics, but it is our day-over-day lifestyle choices that prime and make pervasive dysfunctional dynamics in the body. And we believe in making things super simple, especially in how we educate our patients and clients. And so if we can boil all of these myriad lifestyle choices that could likely precipitate chronic disease into three small buckets, we call them crap food, toxins, and stress. Crap food, toxins, and stress. Three ubiquitous aspects of everyday modern life, right? Crap food, meaning lots of refined foods, a dearth of whole nutrient-dense foods. Crap food tends to involve a lot of calories, a lot of processing, a lot of colors, a lot of artificial colors, artificial sweeteners, artificial flavors, artificial preservatives, artificial texturizing agents. Lots of calories and colors, not a lot of nutrients, not a lot to fuel the biochemistry in the body, which, my friends, we cannot do without nutrients. Toxins, right? All of the myriad different synthetic chemicals that we enjoy, better living through chemistry, that can, of course, build up and challenge the body, overload the body's natural detoxification capability. And toxins can wield a massive array of biochemical and physiological dysfunction in the body. Anything from mitochondrial dysfunction to acute oxidative damage, to actual neurofibril toxicity, directly affecting cellular metabolism and respiration. There are so many different pathways for dysfunction via toxicity. But today I want to talk about the biggest elephant in the room, the topic that we tend to talk about a lot, but we talk about it like we can't do anything about it. We joke about it, and that is stress. And through the functional medicine lens, we know that we have to remember that stress is not just freaking out about the circumstances of our lives, right? Certainly mental or emotional stress, right? About our jobs, about our relationships, about our finances, about any of the circumstances or discomforts or challenges in our lives. But we also have to honor that stress, as far as the body is concerned, can also be biochemical, can be physiological, can be physical, right? And these are things that we don't necessarily experience emotionally, but they are very real sources of stress or challenge on the body. And today we want to explore the world of stress, because it never ceases to amaze me how often people will notice stress. Oh my gosh, they're aware of their stress. It's hilarious to me to watch people spar about whose life is more stressful. As though we are, rather than doing something about the stress, we are perhaps more interested in winning a competition on who's weathering a more stressful lifestyle or life circumstances. And therefore what is more honorable, more impressive, more, making more sacrifices. It's really a warped concept when you consider it. But I've seen women in particular are great about, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed. There's this with my kids, and this with my husband, and this with my job, and this with the car, and this with the finances, and this with the house, and my mom, and blah, 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 blah. And their friend will say, you think that's stressful? Oh my gosh, let me tell you what's going on with my life. And there's this competition to see whose life, I don't know, is harder? Whose life sucks more? Who's struggling more? We're looking for that badge of honor. Who's the greater martyr for putting up with it? But if we want to help people to actually get serious about reversing those disease dynamics that can be persistent or recurring in their bodies and precipitating disease, we've got to help them to really thoroughly understand and do something about their stress state. Not just look at it, not just lament about it or joke about it. We need to actually do something about it. And so let's talk about the notion of stress in the body, right? Because, of course, not all stress is bad. In terms of the body's experience of stress, we have an autonomic nervous system, which has two potent branches, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Most folks are fully familiar with the sympathetic nervous system because we're experiencing it on a daily basis. And we have been, unfortunately, largely in a global environment in these pandemic times. But the sympathetic nervous system is about promoting survival. It helps to stimulate us to fight, flight, and hide in the name of survival. It promotes increased focus and alertness. It increases our blood pressure. It increases our blood sugar. It fuels metabolic activity in an acute way in order to help us to do tremendous physical feats, right? To run really quickly and to lift heavy objects off of loved ones, right? It is designed, however, to be something that we revert to for short-term limited purposes in the name of survival, because all of that sympathetic promotion, right? Elevated levels of epinephrine and norepinephrine and cortisol, and again, higher blood sugar, higher blood pressure, all of these things that are designed to make us strong and hypervigilant and responsive. They have a cost. They have a really dramatic oxidative cost on the body. It is not free. And this is why we have the balanced side of the autonomic nervous system, which is our parasympathetic nervous system. And this, a little factoid that we don't talk about very much, is actually designed to be our primary nervous system mode. Yes, we are meant to spend the majority of our lives in parasympathetic nervous system activation, which is about resting, digesting, healing, having good sex drive, making babies, right? Really savoring life. Or you could think about it as the thriving side of the nervous system in contrast to the surviving side, the sympathetic nervous system mode. But the difference in which physiological functioning is activated by the sympathetic versus the parasympathetic nervous system can play a huge role with regard to our relative state of wellness or illness. We are not designed to be 100% of the time in our parasympathetic nervous system mode. The human body thrives, right, through challenge, through eustress, or to get a little more technical, through the concept of hormesis. And you're familiar with this in many different arenas. I think the best example that our patients can well understand is the concept of exercise, right? We go and purposefully do aggressive physical activity, which is really a form of controlled, limited damage to the body, on purpose to stimulate a protective and restorative mechanism that actually helps us to build more resilient health, right? So we exercise, let's say we lift weights, we do damage to our muscles, right? We have increased stress hormones. There's some wear and tear, but that impetus stimulates healing mechanisms. It stimulates antioxidant pathways. It stimulates the healing and fortification and the actual buildup of muscle tissue. And so in this way, the challenge on the body is rewarded with a stimulated healing and pro-resiliency response. This is what exercise is. This is what mental emotional eustress is, right? Where we have a challenge or some adventure, right? Or a motivation that maybe for a work assignment or a relationship, right? We have a disagreement. We have a goal we're trying to meet. As long as we feel like we have a pathway for exerting some control and autonomy, then that stress can be really quite positive, and it actually, again, supports the resiliency of the body. But the same thing is true metabolically when we undergo fasting or some calorie restriction. This also, through the short-term supposed negative effects of the deprivation, we stimulate vitality promoting mechanisms in the body. In fact, the original word hormesis actually came up from the world of toxicology, where we've learned that, contrary to typical assumption, that toxicity did not exert negative effects in the body in a linear fashion, right? Where you would have a low-grade level of toxic exposure and you would have a low-grade negative effect, and a more moderate exposure and a moderate negative effect. What we've actually found is that many toxic exposures actually have a biphasic response, where, interestingly enough, low-level exposure to tiny amounts of toxins on an intermittent basis actually promotes health, because it stimulates the body's resiliency. It stimulates phase 2, phase 1, phase 3 detox pathways. It stimulates greater synthesis of glutathione, for example. It stimulates hepatic biliary function. It's good. A little bit of challenge that doesn't overwhelm our ability to respond to it promotes health and vitality. And it's a good reminder that we're not designed to live in a bubble. We're not designed to sit on the couch, lonely, no movement, no challenge, no threat, no nothing. We know that sedentary lifestyles promote disease and death. Loneliness and isolation promotes disease and death. No nutrient worries, like excessiveness of calories, never having to worry about anything, promotes disease and death. Too much of anything, too much water, too much sleep, these are all things that can promote disease. It is about balance between these things in the body. And so it's important to remember that there is a hormetic effect, right? This goal of hormesis, where a low-grade stimulus of challenge promotes a positive healing and restorative response from the body. And the same is true of stress. But the problem, my friends, is we've got a lot of people in our practices who are living predominantly in sympathetic nervous system activation. It is not the occasional episodic trigger to fight, flight, hide, and survive. The kind of thing that keeps you from stepping off a curb and getting hit by a car, or paying attention if you're on your phone driving your car, right? Where your sympathetic nervous system gets your attention quickly enough to slam on the brakes so that you're not in an auto accident, right? It helps to make sure that we protect ourselves, that we do survive. But a lot of modern practices and habits can contribute to people having predominantly a sympathetic nervous system activation. And this, of course, wreaks massive oxidative havoc on the body. And in fact, we've even seen, even in the experience that people are having with the COVID-19, the disease manifestation from SARS-CoV-2, that it affects some people not at all, other people quite dramatically. And then this notion of post-COVID syndrome, which is a more severe manifestation, a little bit different, but really a great example of post-viral syndrome, where people suffer longer and more severely from their encounter with the viral disease, depending on how they arrived at the battlefield, depending on how rested they were, how nourished they were, what their nutrient sufficiency was, what their glutathione sufficiency was, what their other antioxidant potential was, how much existing oxidative damage there was in the body, secondary and tertiary infections. And so our experience is very much, what is our norm, right? Is our norm fighting, flighting, and hiding so we're awash in oxidative damage from these excessive levels of challenge? Or is our norm a parasympathetic, rest, digest, fortify, heal, procreate, right? Building health resiliency to help us better weather the different challenges that we have throughout our life, right? To maintain that resilient vitality in the face of challenge. So let's talk about how stress is definitely an insidious factor in this particular dynamic, because while the sympathetic nervous system is accentuating things like the dilation of pupils and increased heart rate and increased blood sugar and increased blood pressure and activating in particular the skeletal muscles in our extremities, right? So we can do physical work. The sympathetic nervous system also, on purpose, by virtue of picking and choosing what functions from an evolutionary viewpoint would help us to fight, flight, and hide. Sympathetic nervous system activation purposefully downregulates all digestive secretions, gastrointestinal motility, detoxification enzyme expression, immune function, in particular innate immune function, and in particular cell-based adaptive immunity, which by the way is how we counter viruses. And so what we see is there's a trade-off in the body. So if episodically we're in a fight, flight, or hide mode, that can be hormetic and valuable to us in terms of promoting resiliency. But when it becomes our primary way of showing up, there are some fundamental physiological processes in the body that just don't work well. And they don't work well not because something's broken in the body. In those scenarios, what we most need is to educate, inspire, and empower our patients to understand that their IBS, right? Their toxic buildup, their bad reaction to alcohol, their brain fog, their constant challenges with allergies and asthma, and their inability to get over that virus. They just stay sick week after week. That's not an accident. And it's not something being broken. It is actually the nervous system and the immune system working in partnership exactly as it was designed to function. And so, sure, we can provide rapid relief and support for that, but if we want to help someone to really get on top of that state of disease and actually reverse it or keep it from happening on a regular basis, we've got to teach them about the effects of stress. When we go into the sympathetic nervous system mode, it is at a price. It is high oxidative damage. It creates a catabolic state, right? That's about breaking down tissue, right? About increasing free fatty acids in the blood. It actually promotes increased activity of osteoclast, which reduces bone density. Yes, that is a stress-mediated dynamic. All sorts of catabolic activity, high oxidative damage, there is a price for that. But if we can become aware of this dynamic and more purposefully choose to shift gears and activate the parasympathetic nervous system mode, we can create better autonomic balance in the body. We can purposefully choose lifestyle choices that tell the nervous system that the war is over, or at least the battle's over, right? We are safe. It is safe for the nervous system to relax and not prioritize fighting, flighting, and hiding, right? It is safe for us to relax. It is safe for the orchestrated physiology in the body to shift gears and promote resting, digesting, healing, procreation, and thriving. It is safe to do that. But we have to educate our patients that that's not going to happen on accident, because most of the people in our practice populations are not aware of just how much their default choices are stimulating a sympathetic nervous system response. And I want to talk about the most insidious, the most prevalent part of people's stress triggering lifestyle choices. What is it that people are wrestling with the most, that they are highly empowered to shift, but they're just not aware of how this is constantly telling their body that their world is not safe. Their world is not safe. We've got to fight, flight, and hide. Our survival is not assured. Our world is not a safe space. Yes, there are many things that contribute to that, right? Crap food, toxins in our foods, toxins in our personal hygiene products, all sorts of different dynamics in our lives. But the number one component of our patients' environments that they are experiencing the most is their thoughts. Their thoughts. Oh my goodness. The vast majority has had this unrelenting litany of commentary from this sock puppet in our head that doesn't stop talking. He's constantly talking about commentary and judgment and speculation about rumination about the status of our world. I catch myself sometimes, even if a circumstance is stressful objectively in my life, my mind is making up stuff about it. It's like expanding on it, making up stuff like things that aren't true in order to worsen the dynamic. And it can be transformative to simply work with the people in your practice to help bring their awareness to that voice in their head. Because our nervous system is, of course, eavesdropping on absolutely everything that voice in our head is saying. It's paying attention to every single one of our fears, every single one of our judgments, everything we speculate on, everything we ruminate about. Everything we are fearful of or think we're not capable of, or that's anxiety producing, or that we keep reliving. One of the reasons why animals can live so well and thrive in really threatening circumstances in the natural world is because they get over stuff. They get over stuff. An animal, even in the wild, right? Running across the savannah, being chased by a lion, right? Once it's clear that it's outrun the lion and it's back with its pack, right? There've been books written on this, right? Why zebras don't get ulcers. You will see the animal do a parasympathetic activating shake and shake their whole entire body. And they literally are just shaking off the stress. And then they go back to grazing and having sex and nuzzling one another. They get over stuff. Oh my God, humans don't get over anything. The argument was over 3 years ago. We're still replaying it in our mind. The misgiving was 18 months ago. We still haven't forgiven the asshole, right? We're still telling that story. We're still telling that story. We've made it worse. We're reliving it, right? The body is not hidden from this stuff. The body's exposed to this all the time. Do you think this type of self-talk and unremitting conversation and rumination in our minds, that's telling our body that it's safe to rest, digest, heal, and procreate? I don't think so. There's nothing about that that supports fertility, that supports wound healing, that supports balanced immune function. I'm going to talk more about that in a second. So we got to get serious about our self-talk, about our mindsets, about the stuff we're making up. It seems like sort of an esoteric concept, and please don't make this mistake. I think a lot of medical practitioners make the mistake of, oh, that is not within my scope of practice. People need to go to a therapist for that, or a counselor, or somebody else. My friends, if we don't start bringing self-talk and mindset into the center of healthcare conversations, we're not going to help the vast majority of people to get well and stay well. Because we've got to start connecting that our inner world, our thoughts are not separate from our physiology. Of course they're not, right? The body in a very real way is following the mind. And of course the body is supporting the mind. But the body is following the mind. It's the biggest cue and clue that's going on about the status of our world. And so whether it's in one-on-one discussion, giving people space to tell their stories, or in group visits or group programs or workshops or community engagement spaces online or Zoom calls, there are so many different ways where you can start telling people this truth and really laying it out for them. You can address all of the physiological imbalances, but if you still got that unremitting voice in your head, do you think that good protective physiology, right, the orchestration of the nervous systems and the HPATG axis and the immune system, if you're addressing all of those biochemical dynamics, but you still constantly ruminating about all your fears and all your grievances and all your misgivings, do you think your nervous system's going to just say, you know, he's just kidding us, he's making up stuff, that's not the real status of our world? No, the nervous system's going to believe you. Of course it's going to believe you. This is a very real way of how whether you are rehearsing things in your mind or actually experiencing them, the nervous system experiences it as your reality. We've got to start teaching people about this. And some of you are sharing wonderful examples of books and teachers in this vein. All of the things that you are sharing are really wonderful reads on this topic. But we've got to start creating spaces where people can start getting real with themselves, making an inventory about their sources of stress, and understanding the very real truth that you're not going to fake out your own nervous system about the status of your stress. Seriously, people try to fake out themselves, their friends, their family all the time. I'm not stressed. I'm managing it. I'm good. You know, you see people like this. No, I'm not stressed. I'm good. No, I'm handling it. It's fine. It's good stress. No, I'm good. It's fine. They're not fine. You can even see how their body, the container of their body is struggling with that stress. But people, you got to teach people. You're not going to fake out your own mind about the status of your stress. It doesn't matter what kind of BS story you tell yourself about navigating the stress, negotiating the stress, handling it just fine. Whatever we might tell others in order to present a persona that we think is more acceptable. The reality on the inside is abundantly clear to our nervous system and our hormonal axis. And this is where teaching people to pay attention to their body. This is where mindfulness practices like yoga and Tai Chi and even stretching, just basic stretching, things that bring us back into our bodies can really help us to start to get real about what we're actually experiencing, and helping people to identify the sources of stress that they may not even acknowledge. Again, the ruminating, social media, constantly being on our phones. Most people are constantly looking at things on our phones that are constantly causing them to be critical about their own lives, their own choices. Basically, constant obsessive comparison to other people, other choices, other jobs, other clothing, other haircuts, other body images, other professional achievements, other accolades, other goals, other levels of visibility, other pictures, right? All of these things, right? And so helping people in order to get serious about these and in order to make different choices is really important. I want to say a particular word for the moment about why this is so essential for immune function. The primary mechanism of parasympathetic activation in the human body is the beautiful, blessed vagus nerve, right? The vagus nerve its name means wandering, right? As in wandering far afield. It's basically the connection between the brain and the visceral body, right? The vagus nerve is connecting our heart, our lungs, our ears, our mouth, our larynx, our pharynx, our esophagus, our stomach, all of our digestive secretions, our motility, our reproductive organs. It's connecting all of these things in a parasympathetic axis to our brain. And what might surprise you to learn is that 80% of that transmission is afferent, right? And 20% of it is efferent, right? There's a lot of crosstalk happening between all of those different organs and glands and systems, informing the brain about the status of our world, right? What is balanced and healthy and calm in our world? What is imbalanced and pro-inflammatory and alarming and oxidative in our lives? We're informing the brain even more than the brain is informing the physiology. But it makes sense that when people get stressed and we lose sufficient activity of this parasympathetic nerve, right? And through repeated ongoing living in a sympathetic dominant nervous system mode, we can lose good parasympathetic tone. And of course, people struggle with issues with regard to optimal function of that parasympathetic nerve. And it can affect anything from our breathing, to our ability to swallow well, our tendency toward nausea and vomiting, incidence of gastroesophageal reflux, our motility, our secretion of stomach acid, our exocrine pancreatic release, our motility later on in the intestines, our bowel movements, right? Normalcy of menstrual cycles in women, right? All of these things are affected by this stress state. But the immune system is probably something that you don't think about. And I want to go back to what I said earlier. It's important to understand that a sympathetic dominant nervous system mode also has a purposeful effect on immune function. Because if you think about it, if you're running for your life, if your body thinks you might die right now or tomorrow, why are we worried about sleep? Why are we worried about fertility? Why are we worried about digestion? And for that matter, why are we worried about fighting that infection? If I'm going to die on the battlefield tomorrow, why do I care if I have a microbial overgrowth? So the immune system or our physiology rather, our orchestrated physiology has learned from an evolutionary viewpoint that the best way to promote survival is to draw reinforcement into fighting, flighting, and hiding in a more primal way. And so with the activation of that sympathetic nervous system mode, with its, hero players like epinephrine and norepinephrine and glutamate and cortisol, right? We have a suppression of first-line immune defenses. We have a suppression of innate immune function. And yes, this makes us more vulnerable to new viral infections. It makes us more vulnerable to heavy viral load of reactivating viruses. But also, it tends to skew the adaptive components of our immune system. We tend to get more emphasis on our humoral adaptive immunity, so we're more likely to respond to extracellular threats. Of course, that also means we're going to be more likely to hypervigilant environmental responses, like the development of food sensitivities and food allergies and other environmental immune reactivity. And we're going to be less responsive to intracellular threats like viruses and cancer cells. And so again, if this is just an episodic threat, it's not a problem. But if that becomes our norm, we should not be surprised that people end up with a constant simmering infectious dynamic in their body that could precipitate any disease, any chronic disease, right? So it's important to teach people about this. But what's particularly relevant, especially as it relates to COVID-19 and the diversity of experiences people have been having with it when they have actually developed the downstream disease from the virus, has to do with the balance in immune regulation. So human immune systems are incredibly potent and strong. And part of how we make sure that the immune system can have an aggressive defense and repair response when necessary, right? When we trigger that stranger danger response, human immune system is aggressive, really aggressive. And it's standing on that accelerator, right, to really aggressively go after the threat. Well, it's so aggressive that balanced, well-regulated immune function is always releasing anti-inflammatory response and T regulatory cells at the same time that we are aggressively releasing a pro-inflammatory response. So as soon as we're standing on the accelerator, we're also gently applying the brake to make sure the car doesn't go crazy and run off the road, right? Well, that inflammatory brake, right, is activated by vagus nerve stimulation. That balance between pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory response in order to minimize the likelihood of excessive pro-inflammatory fire and consequential damage, widespread oxidative damage, which can lead to organ damage, organ dysfunction, and we see this in all sorts of infectious diseases, not just COVID-19. It is about having too aggressive of a pro-inflammatory response that is not appropriately regulated. And we need vagal stimulation. We need parasympathetic activation in order to increase T regulatory cells, in order to increase the complementary slow application of the brake to make sure that our good insidious pro-inflammatory immune response does not go off the deep end. This is where we cannot settle for living in chronic sympathetic nervous system activation, where the only time we get any relief is for a few hours overnight where we finally manage to sleep deeply. And so we don't want to have just an aggressive immune system that's going off the deep end. Ask anyone who has life-threatening allergies or asthma or autoimmune disease. The last thing you want is an off the deep end, hyper-vigilant, aggressive immune system. You want a well-regulated, balanced immune system, and that is a parasympathetic response courtesy of your vagus nerve. And so this is why purposefully activating parasympathetic response whenever we can is just as important. I might argue even more important than a healthy diet, more important than toxin avoidance. Right? It is about ensuring that the body gets this counter-regulation of being able to emphasize physiological and biochemical functioning through parasympathetic activation that is overtly suppressed when we're in sympathetic activation. So let's talk about overt ways to trigger, to stimulate the vagus nerve, right? As I was talking about before, we're not going to fake out our own nervous system. And so part of that is becoming aware of our thoughts. And even while we have stressful circumstances that we don't feel like we can change, absolutely any of you could lead a very effective session with a group of people in your practice around taking tangible, objective action in light of your stresses, right? And this is a lot of the focuses of cognitive behavioral therapy as well, rather than lamenting, right? What has happened, or lamenting and ruminating about what has taken place and continuing to tell the same old story. Being able to actually take some type of action. And in some cases, that action is simply changing the story you tell yourself about it. Reframing the story. How can I take responsibility for my thoughts and shift this habitual automatic negative thought, right? Ants. Automatic negative thought that I have in my head. How can I shift this in a way that's not lying to myself, but simply chooses a different perspective? I'm going to tell a different story. And my favorite example of this is, the glass half full and the glass half empty are both true. They're both factual, right? We're not lying to ourselves when we choose the glass half full versus the glass half empty. We're not being, an ignorant optimist, right? Or a head in the clouds idealist, right? We're being realistic. But trying to say the glass half empty is more realistic than the glass half full is just being negative, right? We can choose to spin every scenario, every situation from the viewpoint of choosing the glass half full. And this is a habit. This is a choice. This is a skill like anything else. Learning to reframe and taking responsibility for our thoughts, taking responsibility for the effect that our circumstances have on our lives. Because stress is not about the circumstances of our lives. I'm sure we all know people who seem to have incredibly challenging lives, financial challenges, health challenges, relationship challenges. And they're doing really well, right? It doesn't matter the circumstances. They are choosing their response. They are choosing the response they have to the objective circumstances. Most people aren't doing that. They're just having a pell-mell reactive response that's based on repeating the same old patterns that we've undergone over and over and over again. And so in this particular, these kinds of scenarios, we can take responsibility for our thoughts and we can reframe them. But when we don't feel like we can do that, we can actually make physiological choices to stimulate the vagus nerve and communicate via physiological choices that it might be safe to trigger a parasympathetic response. And by far, the best way to do this that I have encountered is through breathing. And I get it. Changing your thoughts, focusing on your breathing. I get it. The geeks out there, you're thinking, oh my God, could there be a less sexy concept than that? Probably not, right? But these oh so foundational things, they're so foundational, we take them for granted. They're so foundational, we don't even talk about them. And we've got to talk about them, right? These are critical concepts. The reality is that the body's taking cues and clues from our breathing. When you're in sympathetic nervous system mode, how do you breathe? It's a very particular way. We inhale a lot. We inhale frequently. We have longer inhales, although still relatively short, but very short exhales. And we don't pause in between breaths. We're constantly trying to get more oxygen into the body, which if you're trying to run for your life is a really good idea. But how often are we sitting here at our desk reading an email and getting ticked off and our breathing is getting shallower, right? We haven't breathed into our belly in an hour. We're breathing really shallowly, really quickly with those short exhales. This is where the simple act of setting an alarm on your phone to automatically go off on a day-over-day basis, I don't know, every hour, every 2 hours, at least once a day, to do 5 minutes of mindful breathing. 5 minutes. Everyone has 5 minutes, right? 5 minutes of mindful breathing. And there's all sorts of mindful breathing. But the key being that you breathe on purpose. My favorite is box breathing, where we purposefully have our inhales and our exhales match in duration. And we extend them and we pause. We pause after the inhalation and we pause at the end of the exhalation. And this starts to communicate to your nervous system that you must not be running for your life anymore, because there's no way you could do that and breathe like that. And this has actually been shown to activate parasympathetic nervous system, to bring down cortisol, right? To help to activate higher levels of GABA, right? It has an overt effect on physiology. And you only have to do it for about 5 minutes in order to make these kinds of shifts. And so this is something that we can teach patients and clients to do. And so box breathing, ujjayi breathing, right? Even extended exhalation, right? Where you maybe inhale on a 4 count, but then exhale on an 8 count. So those long, slow, extended exhalations, right? Easy for people to do. Another practice is gratitude journaling, one of my favorite choices. A common practitioner mistake is actually to try to encourage a stressed patient to too quickly go from being really stressed out to doing something that takes a tremendous amount of discipline and focus, like meditate for half an hour. That's kind of like taking someone from McDonald's to organic kale and salmon made in their own home. That's not going to happen, right? Too much change too fast. It may sound good, but people aren't going to make that change too quickly. They may get there eventually, but we have to begin where people are and address slow, progressive change. And as they make change and feel better, they're open to more, right? They feel better, and then they know better, and then they do better, and then they feel better, and they do even better, and then they feel even better than that. And change happens through progressive layers of education, inspiration, and empowerment. And so one of the things that we can teach people to do is to spend 5 or 10 minutes. Again, that's all. 5 or 10 minutes. Either very last thing at the end of the day before they turn off the light to go to sleep, or very first thing in the morning, maybe after they've awakened and they're having a cup of joe, right? To gratitude journal for 5 to 10 minutes about 3 things or 5 things, not 50, 3 or 5, right? Things that they are grateful for. And the key here is not high-level things that don't evoke emotion, right? Not, okay, my family, my health, my friends, I'm done, right? There's nothing parasympathetic activating about that. But if people will actually just stream of consciousness journal for just a minute or so on a few things and bring emotion into it. I'm so grateful for that special time I had with my daughter Sue yesterday, where we both made time to simply sit together and watch our favorite movie, and we snuggled and we laughed and we bonded, and I felt closer to her than I felt in months in her busy teenage lifestyle. Oh my goodness. Saying I'm grateful for my family is not very parasympathetic provoking, but if I can just put 20, 25 words behind it that evokes emotion, calm, stimulating, warm, parasympathetic emotion, I can stimulate that response in my body. Gratitude journaling is really powerful. And again, it can be a pathway. Even people who have an awful lot of stress and a lot of ruminating in their minds can usually access gratitude if there's an impetus for doing it. But let's talk about other things that can be done, because activating the vagus nerve physiologically stimulates parasympathetic response. And you can do this not only with mindful breathing, which is a very effective, but also from gargling, from singing, from humming, right? From snuggling, right? Good for, pets, children, loved ones. Acupuncture, massage, spending time with a pet. The concept of peaceful mindedness, right, is a key concept for parasympathetic activation. But the very act of, even if you're angry, even if you're struggling, being able to exactly chant, yodel, sing, gargle, right? These types of things that can help to stimulate the vagus nerve physiologically, can help to activate parasympathetic response. And so these are things we want you to consider. Also, exposing yourself to beauty, things that you find beautiful, a sunrise, a sunset, pictures you enjoy, right? Looking at pictures on your phone of things that are warm and familiar and beautiful to you. A simple small flower arrangement, right? A beautifully prepared meal, right? A beautiful stalk of broccoli or some fresh foods that you're preparing. These things have physiological effects, right? Beauty, peaceful mindedness, feelings of comfort, feelings of soft stimulation on the skin, a soft blanket, right? These kinds of things. Moisturizing the skin, this kind of self-massage, right? Having a good moisturizer, maybe putting a few drops of essential oil. That not only sounds good, it actually activates parasympathetic response. Natural daylight, fresh air. These are things that have, they may not satisfy the geek in all of us of being these edge of technology concepts in our typical perception, but I think we need to invert our perception on its head, because these have dramatic physiological power that, generally speaking, we are not harnessing in clinical practice. And so I really want you to have something in your practice that is bringing these tools to the people that you serve. It's not enough to tell people to reduce their stress. Who does that? People don't know how to do that. They get that guidance in myriad newspapers and magazine articles and blogs. And, if that simple guidance changed people's lives, nobody would be sick. It doesn't though, because people intellectually know that stress reduction or greater mindfulness, or even if they're more astute, parasympathetic activation is health promoting. But people don't necessarily know how to do it, and they haven't been galvanized on why it's important for their unique body and for their particular health challenges. And so I think it's essential that we start emphasizing this in clinical practice. And for people who have a hard time becoming aware of their stuff, I also want to emphasize the importance of some awesome apps. Things like HeartMath is a really great tool to help people to become more aware of how their perception affects their cardiovascular function, and in particular, their heart rate variability, which is a really excellent marker of parasympathetic activation. We can also use wearables, things like Oura rings, right? And other wearable devices that can help to display for us what is our heart rate variability like. And for that matter, what are some other activities, right? What is our good, deep, restorative sleep like? People may perceive that they're asleep for 7 hours, but how much of that is deep and restorative? Sometimes people are shocked to find out not very much, maybe none. And so there are lots of tools and solutions that we can bring to people. But please make no mistake, uttering the words, you got to reduce your stress, that doesn't change lives. People don't know how to do it because the average person we're serving in our practice is falling prey every single day to the unhealthy default realities of our cultures. And the default realities in our cultures are by and large disease promoting. They're disease promoting. They're not health promoting. They're not resiliency promoting. It's crap food, toxins, and stress on steroids everywhere, right? And so it requires that people have enough support, enough education, inspiration, and empowerment to be willing to be healthy deviants, to be willing to be different, to stand out, to be the weird one, right? To be the unicorn in their family or in their scope of friends. They need some support to do this. It takes guts to do something different than what everybody else is doing, to be willing to risk standing out and having people say, why are you doing that? Nobody else does that. You're weird. Why would you do this? Why don't you just do what we're doing? How come you can't eat what we're eating? How come you can't use the shampoo everybody else uses, right? How come you can't be obsessed with social media like everybody else is? Weirdo, right? It takes guts to be a healthy deviant. And maybe all of us don't give a crap anymore about what people think because we're so galvanized in our commitment to our own health. But the average person is not making sustainable change in their health promoting lifestyle choices because they don't have support. Right? My friend Pilar Gerasimo has written the most amazing book, right? The Healthy Deviant, which is about calling a spade and shining a bright light on how challenging this is. People need support in order to make sustainable lifestyle choices that go counter to cultural norms. So this is critical for activating the vagus nerve, activating parasympathetic response. There are absolutely other short-term tools when people are completely stressed out and they've got high levels of cortisol and lots of surges of epinephrine and they're struggling with ruminating. There are supplements that can be helpful. We could certainly think about things like L-theanine, which helps to increase synthesis of GABA and actually potentiate GABA receptors. Things like magnesium, which also help to increase glutamate to GABA conversion, right? And also magnesium is critical for breaking down, metabolizing catecholamines, right? Our major stress hormones. So checking sufficiency of magnesium, sufficiency of B vitamins, especially B6, is also critical for being able to promote more inhibitory, calming neurotransmission as opposed to that stimulatory, hypervigilant neurotransmission. Making sure that we're not self-medicating our stress with too many stimulants and caffeine, theobromine, sugar, these types of things. But there are many different calming herbs. Yes, exactly. Things like valerian and ashwagandha and holy basil and passion flower that can be found in teas or in tinctures, right? Or in herbal supplements that can absolutely make a significant difference if people feel like they need some help, right? Especially with stress, we recommend things like magnesium glycinate Glycine in the brain and central nervous system acts as a calming neurotransmitter all on its own. You could also choose magnesium taurate. Taurine also helps to potentiate GABA, right? If people also have a lot of physical tension in their body, they're expressing a lot of that stress in terms of rigidity and muscular tightness and spasm and tension, then we could think about things like magnesium threonate or magnesium malate, or even a multi, like a trimag formula. Plenty of options out there to consider for some support. But ultimately, the most important thing are the lifestyle choices that we make on a day-over-day basis. I thank you so much for joining me, and I want to thank you all in your various modalities around the world for being here today and being on this leading edge of healthcare transformation. Have a great day.